The listening station sat at the edge of human space, like a forgotten thing. It was old, small, and cold, the kind of place the military sent people when it had no better use for them. Omega 7, they called it. A metal box, floating in the black, far from Earth, far from Mars, far from anything that mattered. Its only job was to listen, and for years, it heard nothing worth reporting. Lieutenant Jisoo sat alone in the signal room, her boots on the console, her eyes half closed. The screens in front of her showed the same thing they always showed: cosmic noise, dead transmissions from trade ships that had passed through years ago, the faint hum of distant stars doing what stars do. She had been stationed here for 14 months, and in that time she had flagged exactly 0 signals of importance. She was beginning to believe she never would. The coffee in her cup had gone cold 2 hours ago. She thought about heating it. She thought about not heating it. She thought about the fact that she had graduated top of her class in communications, and somehow ended up babysitting static at the edge of nowhere. She closed her eyes. The console beeped. It was a small sound, a soft, almost polite little beep, the kind the system made when it caught something unusual in the noise. Jisoo opened one eye. The screen showed a new frequency, raw, unencrypted, and broadcasting on a wide band. That was strange. Most alien transmissions were encrypted and narrow, designed to reach specific targets. This one was screaming in every direction at once, like someone throwing a bottle into the ocean and hoping anyone would find it. She sat up. She pulled her boots off the console and leaned forward. Her fingers moved across the controls, isolating the signal, cleaning it, running it through the translation matrix. The system chewed on it for a few seconds. The language was not in the standard Galactic Trade Index. It was something older, something the system had to dig deep to find. But it found it. The translation appeared on her screen, line by line, and Jisoo felt the warmth leave her body. To anyone listening, they are burning our world. Our children are in the shelters. We have no weapons. We have no fleet. Please, please, we are dying. She read it again, then a third time. The signal was repeating, looping every 90 seconds, the same words over and over. She checked the source coordinates. It was coming from far outside human space, from a system she had never heard of, from the species the database identified as the Velimi. She pulled up everything the database had on them. It was not much. They were a peaceful civilization, small, fragile beings with bioluminescent skin. They had evolved on a low-gravity world with no predators, no wars, no weapons. They had never made contact with almost anyone. And now they were dying. Jisoo's hands were shaking. She pressed the priority flag and routed the signal up the chain of command. She marked it with the highest urgency code she had access to. Then she sat back in her chair and listened to the signal loop again, and she thought about how small and afraid the voice sounded, even through the flat tone of the translation software. The signal climbed the chain fast. It passed through 3 relay stations, 2 sector commands, and a fleet intelligence office before it reached the desk it was always going to reach. Within the hour, it was playing through the speakers in the private quarters of Admiral Taeho, aboard the Terran flagship Grim Tide, docked in the forge yards of Mars. Taeho listened to it in the dark. He was sitting in his chair by the viewport, looking out at the red dust of Mars below, and the shapes of warships resting in the orbital yards around him. He was a tall man, broad, with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone and then weathered by decades of hard wind. His hair was cut short, streaked with gray. His eyes were dark and still. He had commanded fleets in 3 border conflicts, put down 2 pirate uprisings, and once held a defensive line against a drashed raiding party with 4 ships when he should have had 40. He was not a man who frightened easily. He played the signal again. His senior staff gathered in the war room within 20 minutes. Captain Yuna was the first to arrive, as she always was. She stood with her arms crossed, her jaw tight, listening. Dr. Hana arrived next, already pulling data on the Velimi onto her tablet. Then came the others, tactical officers, intelligence analysts, logistics commanders. They filled the room and waited for Teiho to speak. He let the signal play one more time for all of them to hear. Teiho looked at his officers. He did not ask for opinions. He did not ask for a vote. He asked one question. How fast can the fleet move? Yuna answered without hesitation. If we start engine ignition within the hour, we can have 300 ships in hyperspace by dawn. Hana looked up from her tablet. Admiral, the Velimi system is outside our territory. The Galactic Council has standing advisories against Terran military operations beyond our borders. If we mobilize, there will be political consequences. Teiho looked at her. Doctor, what is the estimated civilian population on the Velimi homeworld? Hana swallowed. Approximately 6 billion. And the signal says they have no weapons and no fleet. That is correct. And how long has this signal been broadcasting? Hana checked her data. Based on signal degradation and travel time, approximately 9 days. Someone had been calling for help for 9 days, and no one had answered. Not the Galactic Council, with their thousands of member species. Not the trade federations, with their vast fleets. Not the peacekeeping forces that were supposed to exist for exactly this reason. No one. Teiho stood up. He was quiet for a moment, and the room held its breath. Wake the fleet, he said. That was all. 2 words, but they moved through the chain of command like a shockwave. Within minutes, the forge yards of Mars were alive. Warships that had been sleeping in cold dock for years began to hum. Reactor cores ignited. Running lights flickered on, one after another, like eyes opening in the dark. Crews scrambled to their stations. Ammunition was loaded. The recall signal went out across all of human space, pulling soldiers from leave, from stations, from their homes. Across Earth, across Mars, across the colonies on Europa and Titan, men and women received the signal on their personal devices. A single line of text, with the fleet seal beside it. All hands, full mobilization, report immediately. They went. They did not ask why. They did not hesitate. They were Deathworlders. They were born on a planet that had spent 4 billion years trying to kill everything on it, and they had not only survived, but thrived. They had crawled out of the mud, fought the predators, endured the plagues, survived the ice ages, and clawed their way to the stars with bloody hands and unbreakable will. The galaxy called them monsters. The galaxy was afraid of them, and now the monsters were waking up. In the forge yards, 300 warships began to move. Dreadnoughts the size of mountains, carriers packed with fighters, destroyers fast and sharp like knives, marine transports heavy with soldiers. And at the front, the grim tide, dark and massive and terrible, with Admiral Teiho standing on the bridge, looking forward into the black. Somewhere out there, someone small and afraid had asked for help. And Earth had answered. The fleet moved through hyperspace like a river of iron. 300 warships, locked in tight formation, cutting through the blue-white tunnel of faster-than-light travel with the kind of precision that only came from centuries of war. Every ship knew its place. Every crew knew its role. There was no confusion, no disorder. The Terran Deathworld fleet moved the way a predator moved, silent, focused, and certain of what it was going to do when it arrived. Aboard the dreadnought Iron Hymn, Captain Yuna stood at the center of the bridge, her hands behind her back, watching the hyperspace corridor scroll past on the main screen. She had served under Teiho for 11 years. She had fought beside him, argued with him, and trusted him with her life more times than she could count. When he said wake the fleet, she did not question it. She simply started giving orders. Now she turned to face her crew. They were good people, trained, disciplined, and hard. Most of them had never seen real combat. The last major engagement the fleet had fought was 8 years ago, a short and brutal skirmish with Drashk raiders along the frontier. But they were ready. She could see it in the way they sat at their stations, in the way their eyes stayed sharp and their hands stayed steady. "Listen carefully," Una said. Her voice was calm, but carried through the bridge like it weighed something. "We are responding to a civilian distress call from a species called the Velimi. They are not our allies. They are not part of any treaty. Most of you have never heard of them. That does not matter. What matters is that they asked for help and no one answered. We are going to change that." She paused and let that settle. "The aggressors are the Drashk Dominion. You know the name. Slavers, raiders. They pick targets that cannot fight back, and they take what they want. Resources, territory, people. They have been besieging the Velimi homeworld for approximately 11 days. We do not know how many have died. We do know that the Velimi have no military, no weapons, and no way to defend themselves." A young officer near the back of the bridge raised his hand. "Captain, what are our rules of engagement?" Una looked at him. The Admiral's order was weapons-free upon arrival. If it flies a Drashk flag, you put it down. If it points a gun at a civilian, you put it down faster. Any questions? There were no questions. In the science bay 2 decks below, Dr. Hana was surrounded by screens. She had pulled every piece of data the Terran database had on the Velimi and spread it across her workspace like a puzzle. What she found made her heart ache. The Velimi were beautiful. They were small, rarely taller than 1.5 meters, with thin limbs and delicate frames. Their bones were partially hollow, adapted for their low-gravity homeworld. Their skin was translucent, and beneath it, bioluminescent cells pulsed with soft light. Blues, greens, golds, that changed with their emotions. They communicated as much through light as through sound. Joy was a warm gold. Fear was a flickering white. Grief was a deep, slow blue. They had no claws, no fangs, no venom, no armor. They had evolved on a world where the weather was gentle, the oceans were calm, and nothing hunted them. They had never needed to fight, so they never learned. They built their civilization on art, music, science, and community. They were, by every measure, the opposite of humanity. Hana stared at the image of a Velimi family on her screen. 2 adults and 3 children, their skin glowing in soft harmony. She thought about what the Drashk were doing to them right now, and she had to close her eyes for a moment before she could continue working. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace, briefly, at Galactic Council Relay Station ORX-3 to recalibrate navigation systems. It was a routine stop, but word of the Terran mobilization had already spread. A Council diplomatic vessel was waiting for them. The Council ambassador appeared on the Grim Tide's communication screen within seconds of their arrival. She was a tall, insectoid being from a species Teho could not be bothered to remember the name of. She spoke quickly and formally. "Admiral Teho, the Galactic Council has been informed of your fleet's mobilization. We must remind you that the Drashk Dominion is a recognized sovereign entity with territorial rights under Council law. Any military action against the Drashk would constitute an act of aggression and would be subject to Council review and possible sanctions. We urge diplomatic restraint." Teho stood on his bridge with his arms at his sides. He listened to every word. Then he spoke. "Ambassador, did the Council receive the Velimi distress signal?" A pause. The ambassador's mandibles clicked nervously. The signal was received and logged by council monitoring stations. Yes. When did you receive it? Another pause, longer this time. Approximately 8 days ago. And what action did the council take? The silence that followed was the loudest thing on the bridge. The ambassador shifted, her compound eyes darting. The matter was referred to the Committee on Interspecies Conflict for review and recommendation. The process is ongoing. Tejo nodded slowly. 8 days, 6 billion civilians under siege, and you referred it to a committee. Admiral, the council process exists to prevent exactly this kind of unilateral military. Close the channel, Tejo said. The screen went dark. He turned to Yuna, who had been watching from the side. She raised an eyebrow. He did not smile, but something in his eyes shifted. Something hard and old and certain. Resume course, he said. Full speed. In the transport bays deep in the belly of the fleet, Sergeant Day walked among his Marines. They were the ground assault force, the ones who would go down to the surface and fight in the dirt and the rubble and the smoke. They were big, hard people, most of them covered in scars from training, from deployments, from simply living on a world where everything wanted to eat you. Day was the biggest of them all. He stood over 2 meters tall, with shoulders like a wall. His face was flat and calm. The kind of face that did not show emotion because it did not need to. He had been a Marine for 22 years. He had fought in jungles, deserts, frozen wastelands, and the vacuum of space. He was not complicated. He simply did what needed to be done. He stopped in front of a young Marine who was checking her rifle with trembling hands. She looked up at him. He could see the fear in her eyes, and he did not judge her for it. Fear was natural. Fear was honest. It was what you did with it that mattered. Sergeant, she said, what are we walking into down there? Day looked at her for a moment. Slavers. They came for people who cannot fight. We are going to make them regret that. She nodded and went back to her rifle, and her hands were a little steadier than before. In the hangar bay of the Iron Hymn, Ensign Kung sat in the cockpit of his corvette, the Fang. It was a small, fast attack ship, built for close air support and quick strikes. Kung was 23 years old, the youngest pilot in the fleet, and he was trying very hard to look like he was not terrified. He had trained for this. He had run simulations. He had scored well in every test. But simulations did not shoot back, and tests did not bleed. His communication unit crackled. It was Captain Yuna. Kyung. Yes, Captain. When we arrive, stay close to the formation. Do not try to be a hero. Follow your flight leader. Make your runs, and come home. Understood? Understood, Captain. Good. Yuna out. Kyung sat alone in the quiet cockpit, and breathed. He looked at the small photograph taped to his instrument panel. His mother and his younger sister, standing in the garden of their home on Earth, smiling in the sunlight. He touched the photo with one finger, then put his helmet on and began his pre-flight checks. The fleet entered the final hyperspace jump. Bora, the fleet AI, spoke across every ship in a voice that was calm and clear and without any warmth at all. Attention all hands. We will exit hyperspace in the Valimi system in approximately 14 minutes. Tactical assessment indicates a Drashk blockade fleet of approximately 150 warships in orbit around the Valimi homeworld. Slave transports have been detected descending to the surface. Estimated civilian casualties since the beginning of the siege exceed 200,000. The Admiral's standing order is weapons free upon arrival. All stations prepare for combat. 300 ships, 60,000 Terran soldiers, sailors, pilots, and marines, born on a world of poison, fire, and blood, raised in gravity that would crush most species, fed on meat torn from animals that fought back, hardened by plagues that killed billions and still could not finish them. The galaxy called them monsters. The monsters were 14 minutes away. The Terran fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a hammer falling from the sky. 300 warships materialized at the edge of the Valimi system, in perfect formation, their hulls dark against the starfield, their weapons already hot. There was no warning broadcast, no diplomatic hail, no demand for surrender. Admiral Tejo had already made his decision, and there was nothing left to say. The Valimi homeworld hung in the distance, and it was burning. Even from orbit, the fires were visible. Great orange wounds across the continents, cities turned to ash, forests reduced to black scars. The Drashk blockade fleet sat in a loose ring around the planet. About 150 warships of various sizes, their hulls painted in the dark red and black of the Dominion. Slave transports moved between the fleet and the surface like fat insects, carrying their stolen cargo up from the dying world below. Warlord Gorek stood on the bridge of his command ship, the Dominion's Fist, watching the harvest reports come in. The operation was going well. The Valimi were cooperating, as weak species always did once you burned enough of their cities. His soldiers were rounding up the healthiest specimens for the slave markets and disposing of the rest. It was routine. He had done this to a dozen worlds. No one ever came to help. No one ever cared. His sensor officer screamed, "Warlord, contacts! Multiple contacts exiting hyperspace at the system boundary." Gorek turned. "How many?" The officer's scales had gone pale. 300. Configuration matches Terran military vessels. The bridge went very quiet. Every Drashk officer on that ship knew what the word Terran meant. They had all heard the stories. A species from a death world, a planet with crushing gravity, toxic atmosphere, extreme temperatures, and an ecosystem designed to kill everything in it. The Terrans had not only survived this nightmare world, but had somehow climbed to the top of its food chain, and then left it to spread across the stars. The Galactic Council had classified them as Category Omega, the highest threat level, and every civilized species in the galaxy avoided their space the way small animals avoided the den of a predator. Gorek stared at his sensor screen. 300 ships. He had 150. His ships were large and well-armed, built to overwhelm weaker fleets. But these were not weaker ships. These were Terran warships, over-engineered, over-armored, and crewed by beings who could survive forces that would turn his soldiers to paste. He opened a channel. "All ships, battle formation, raise shields and charge weapons. We hold the..." The first volley hit before he finished the sentence. The Terran fleet fired everything at once. Railguns launched tungsten slugs at a fraction of the speed of light. Plasma lances cut through the void in lines of white-blue fire. Missile swarms erupted from carrier decks and streaked across the gap between the fleets, like a swarm of angry insects. Kinetic kill vehicles, simple blocks of dense metal, accelerated to incredible speeds, slammed into the Drashk formation with the force of small asteroids. The first 30 seconds of the battle destroyed 22 Drashk warships. They simply came apart. Hulls cracked, reactors detonated, atmosphere vented into the void in great white plumes. The Drashk returned fire, but their weapons had been designed to fight species like the Valimi. Fragile, weak, easy to break. Their plasma bolts splashed against Terran hull plating, like rain against rock. Their missiles detonated against Terran shields and accomplished nothing. The Terran ships were built by a civilization that had survived asteroid impacts, supervolcanoes, and world wars. They were built to endure. Captain Yuna drove the Iron Hymn straight into the center of the Drashk formation. It was a tactic that no sane captain from any other species would attempt, pushing a ship directly into the heart of an enemy fleet, surrounded on all sides, absorbing fire from every direction. But the Iron Hymn could take it. Its armor was meters thick, its shields were layered, and Yuna was not interested in being safe. She was interested in splitting the Drashk fleet in half, and that is exactly what she did. "Broadsides," she said calmly. "Both sides, fire at will." The Iron Hymn unleashed its full broadside batteries, port and starboard, at point-blank range. Drashk ships on either side buckled under the assault. One broke in half, its spine shattered. Another's reactor went critical, and it detonated in a ball of blue-white fire that consumed two smaller ships nearby. The Drashk formation, already confused by the speed and violence of the Terran attack, fractured into two disorganized clusters. Gorek screamed orders from his bridge, but his fleet was no longer listening. His captains were panicking. They had never faced anything like this. The Terran ships moved at accelerations his species could not survive, pulling turns at 9, 10, 12 times standard gravity. The humans inside those ships were being crushed into their seats by forces that would kill a Drashk instantly, and they did it without slowing down. It was not a battle. It was something else, something the Drashk had no word for, because they had never been on this side of it before. While the fleet tore through the Drashk blockade in orbit, the marine transports punched through the gaps and dove toward the surface. Drop pods launched from their bays in waves, streaking through the atmosphere like burning meteors, slamming into the ground around the Valimi capital city with enough force to crack pavement and shake buildings. Sergeant Day was the first one out. He kicked the door off his drop pod and stepped into smoke and fire. The Valimi capital was a ruin. Beautiful buildings that had once glowed with soft bioluminescent light were now broken shells. Streets that had been designed for a gentle, peaceful species were littered with debris and bodies. And among the wreckage, Drashk soldiers in heavy armor were dragging Valimi civilians from shelters, fitting slave collars around their thin necks, and loading them into transports. Day raised his rifle and fired. The first Drashk soldier dropped before it knew what hit it. The second turned and saw something it had never seen before. A Deathworld predator in full combat armor, moving fast, shooting with precision that should not have been possible under fire. Day's Marines poured out of their drop pods behind him, spreading across the streets, engaging Drashk ground troops wherever they found them. The Drashk were larger than humans. They were reptilian, scaled, strong, and equipped with plasma weapons and heavy armor. They were used to fighting species that ran, species that surrendered, species that broke. Humans did none of these things. A Drashk soldier fired a plasma bolt into a Marine named Subin. It hit her left shoulder and burned through her armor. She stumbled. The Drashk expected her to fall, to scream, to die. Instead, she looked down at the wound, looked back up at the Drashk, and shot it twice in the chest. Then she kept moving. Another Marine, a man named Take, rounded a corner and came face to face with 3 Drashk soldiers, dragging a group of Valimi children. He did not have time to raise his rifle. He hit the first Drashk with his helmet, breaking its jaw. He grabbed the second by the arm and snapped it at the joint. The third tried to run, and Take shot it in the back. The Valimi children stared at him, their skin flickering white with terror. He knelt down, made himself small, and said the only word of Valimi he had learned from Dr. Hana's briefing packet. Safe. In the sky above, Ensign Kyung flew the Fang through columns of smoke and anti-aircraft fire. His mission was close air support, destroying Drashk armor and vehicles that were advancing on the refugee shelters where thousands of Valimi civilians were hiding. He was terrified, but his targeting was true. He found a column of Drashk armored vehicles moving toward Shelter 7, the largest in the city, holding an estimated 12,000 Valimi. He dove. Anti-aircraft fire ripped past his cockpit. A bolt clipped his starboard engine, and it screamed and died. He had seconds. He lined up the shot, fired everything the Fang had, missiles, cannons, everything, and watched the column disappear in a wall of fire and metal. The Fang, now on one engine, could not pull up in time. Kyung fought the controls, angled the nose up as much as he could, and hit the ground hard near the shelter. The Corvette skidded across the dirt, tearing a trench in the earth, before slamming to a stop against a low wall. Kyung hung in his harness, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, breathing hard. The canopy was cracked. He could smell smoke and fuel. He punched the emergency release and crawled out of the wreckage. Velimi civilians were standing at the entrance of the shelter, staring at him. They were small and fragile and glowing faint white with fear. They had watched his ship fall from the sky. They had watched him destroy the machines that were coming to take them. And now they saw him, tall, heavy, bleeding, and alive, on a planet where every breath he took was easier than any breath he had ever taken on Earth. One of them stepped forward, a small one, a child. It reached out a tiny, translucent hand and touched Kung's arm. Its glow shifted from white to a soft, uncertain gold. Kung looked down at the child and tried to smile, even though everything hurt. Above, the orbital battle ended. The Drashk fleet was shattered. 73 ships destroyed. 42 captured. The rest had surrendered or were drifting powerless. Gorek's command ship, the Dominion's Fist, was disabled and caught in a tractor beam from the grim tide. On the ground, the last Drashk holdouts threw down their weapons, and in a bunker beneath what was left of the capital, Elder Nolu, leader of the Velimi, heard the guns go silent. He climbed the steps slowly, his old body trembling, his skin pulsing deep blue with grief for everything that had been lost. He stepped outside and looked up. The sky was full of ships, dark, massive, terrible ships, hanging in the sky like iron clouds. They were not Drashk, they were something else, something he had never seen, something the galaxy feared. They had come for his people. And Elder Nolu, standing in the ruins of his world, wept, not because he was afraid, but because for 9 days he had screamed into the dark and believed no one was listening. The silence after battle was always the hardest part. The guns stopped firing, the explosions faded, the smoke drifted, and what was left was the truth of what had happened, laid bare in broken buildings and broken bodies, and the quiet crying of people who had survived something they should not have had to survive. Admiral Tejo came down to the surface on the second day. He had spent the first day in orbit, managing the fleet, coordinating prisoner transport, and ensuring every Drashk warship was either captured or accounted for. He was thorough. He did not rush, but when the tactical work was done, he put on his coat, boarded a shuttle, and went down to see for himself what the Drashk had done to the Velimi homeworld. Captain Yuna went with him. So did Dr. Hana. The shuttle landed at the edge of the Velimi capital, or what was left of it. The city had once been a place of extraordinary beauty. Hana had shown him images from the database, towers of living crystal that hummed with soft light, bridges that arced like music made solid, gardens where bioluminescent flowers bloomed in patterns that told stories. All of it was gone now. The towers were broken stumps. The bridges had collapsed into the rivers below. The gardens were ash. Tejo walked through the streets with his hands at his sides. He did not speak. Yuna walked beside him, her face set like stone, her eyes taking in every detail. Hana followed behind, her tablet in her hands, recording everything for the medical and historical files. Around them, Terran Marines stood at intersections and checkpoints, keeping order, distributing supplies, helping where they could. And the Velimi watched. They watched from doorways and windows and the mouths of shelters, small, fragile beings, barely reaching Tejo's chest, their translucent skin pulsing with faint, uncertain light. They had never seen humans before. They had never seen any Deathworld species before. To them, Tejo and his soldiers were something from a nightmare. Massive, heavy, dense with muscle and bone, breathing the Valimi's air as if it were nothing, walking in gravity that felt like a gentle breeze compared to what they had evolved under. The Valimi had stories about creatures like this, old myths about monsters that lived on worlds of fire and storm. And now, the monsters were walking through their streets. But the monsters were handing out food. The monsters were carrying wounded Valimi to medical stations with hands that could crush stone, but chose to be gentle. The monsters were pulling bodies from rubble and laying them out carefully, respectfully, covering them with clean cloth. Tejo arrived at the Grand Shelter, the largest underground bunker in the capital. It had held over 15,000 Valimi during the siege, most of them children. The entrance was damaged, but intact. Terran engineers had already stabilized the structure and restored power. Inside, Valimi families huddled together in clusters, their combined glow creating pools of soft, shifting light in the dim corridors. Elder Nolu was waiting for him at the entrance. The elder was old. His skin was thin, and his glow was faint, a pale blue that spoke of deep weariness and grief. He stood with the help of a staff, his body bent, but his eyes clear. He watched Tejo approach with an expression that was impossible to read. Part fear, part wonder, part something else entirely. Tejo stopped in front of him. The two leaders stood facing each other. One was tall and broad and heavy, built by a world that punished weakness with extinction. The other was small and light and delicate, shaped by a world that had never required him to be anything but kind. His voice was soft, and the translation device on Hana's tablet rendered his words in flat, precise English. Admiral of the Terrans, I am Nolu, Elder of the Valimi. I must ask you a question, and I hope you will answer me honestly. Tejo nodded. Ask. Why did you come? It was a simple question. It should have had a simple answer. But the way Nolu asked it, the way his glow dimmed and his voice trembled, told Tejo that it was the most important question the elder had ever asked anyone. We are nothing to you, Nolu continued. We have no resources you need. We have no technology you lack. We have no military alliance to offer. We are small and weak, and we could not even defend our own children. Every species in the galaxy heard our call. None of them came. Why did you? Tejo was quiet for a long moment. Yuna watched him. The Veloimi in the shelter watched him, their glows flickering with anxious light. Then Tejo did something that surprised everyone. He knelt. He lowered himself down so that he was at eye level with the old elder, so that Nolu did not have to look up at him like a small creature looking up at something that could destroy it. He knelt on the broken ground of a world that was not his own, and he spoke. Where I come from, the strong protect the weak. That is what separates us from the things that tried to hurt you. Nolu stared at him. His glow shifted, slowly, from pale blue to something warmer. He reached out and placed his hand on Tejo's. The contact was startling. Tejo's hand was large, rough, scarred, warm with the high metabolism of a Deathworld species. Nolu's was small, smooth, cool, fragile as glass. Two hands from two worlds that could not have been more different, resting together in the ruins of a shelter full of children. Nolu's glow brightened to a steady, warm gold. He did not need to say anything. The light said it for him. 3 days later, the Galactic Council sent a diplomatic delegation. They arrived in a gleaming white ship covered in council emblems, and they were furious. The lead ambassador was a tall, thin being with gray skin and 4 arms, a species known for their bureaucratic precision and their absolute commitment to procedure. She marched into the temporary command post that Tejo had set up in a cleared section of the capital. and began speaking before she even sat down. Admiral Tejo. The Galactic Council formally protests the unauthorized military action taken by the Terran fleet against the sovereign forces of the Drashk Dominion. This action was conducted without council approval, without diplomatic consultation, and in direct violation of the Interspecies Non-Aggression Compact. The Council demands an immediate withdrawal of all Terran forces, and the submission of your fleet command to a formal tribunal. Tejo listened. He let her finish. Then he stood. Ambassador, I would like to show you something. Will you walk with me? She hesitated, then agreed. Tejo led her through the streets of the capital. He showed her the burned buildings. He showed her the mass graves the Drashk had dug and filled before the Terrans arrived. He took her to a warehouse where the Marines had found 700 slave collars, small ones, sized for children. He showed her the scorch marks on the walls of a school where the Drashk had herded Velimi families and set it on fire. The ambassador said nothing for a long time. Her gray skin had gone a shade paler. Tejo stopped walking. He turned to face her. His voice was steady and quiet, the way it always was, but there was iron beneath it. You received the same distress signal we did. You received it 8 days before we did. You referred it to a committee. While you discussed procedure, children were fitted with slave collars. While you debated jurisdiction, families were burned alive. The Drashk did this because they knew no one would stop them. They knew the council would send diplomats and observers and investigators, and by the time any of them arrived, the Velimi would already be in chains. He paused. We are done asking for your permission to do what is right. The ambassador left that evening. She did not mention the tribunal again. Bora, the fleet AI, had recorded everything. Every image, every data point, every piece of evidence of what the Drashk had done and what the Terrans had done in response. On Tejo's orders, Bora compiled it into a complete report and broadcast it on every open frequency in the galaxy. Every species, every government, every station and ship with a receiver could see it. The footage of burning Velimi cities, the slave collars, the mass graves, and then the Terran fleet arriving, fighting, winning, and helping. The report spread across the galaxy in hours. On 1,000 worlds, beings of every shape and size watched a death world species, the most feared creatures in the known universe, kneel in the rubble of a stranger's world and offer help to people they had never met. On the last day before the diplomatic delegation left, the Marines brought Warlord Gorek before Tejo. The Drashk warlord was in chains, his red scales dull, his posture defiant even in defeat. He looked at Tejo with pure hatred. You are savages, Gorek hissed, beasts from a cursed world. You have no right to interfere in the affairs of. Beasts do not answer distress calls, Tejo said. His voice did not rise. His expression did not change. He simply looked at Gorek, the way a man looks at something small and unpleasant that he has found on the bottom of his shoe. Take him away, he said. 3 weeks passed. The Terran fleet stayed. No one in the galaxy expected that. The Council expected the humans to win their fight, collect their glory, and leave. The other species expected the Deathworlders to take payment in territory or resources, the way powerful civilizations always did. Even the Velimi, grateful as they were, waited with quiet anxiety for the moment the humans would reveal what they truly wanted. But the fleet did not leave, and it did not ask for anything. Instead, it went to work. Dr. Hana set up a permanent medical outpost in the remains of the Velimi Central Hospital. The building was half collapsed, but Terran engineers shored up the structure, rebuilt the walls, and restored the medical systems within days. Hana spent her mornings treating wounded Velimi, and her afternoons training Velimi healers in triage techniques she had adapted for their physiology. The Velimi body was fragile in ways that constantly surprised her. Their bones could fracture from impacts that a human child would shrug off. Their circulatory system was so efficient at low gravity that even mild changes in pressure could cause internal bleeding. She learned to be gentle in ways she had never needed to be before. She learned to control the strength in her hands, to move slowly, to speak softly. The Velimi healers watched her with wide eyes at first, afraid of her size and her density and the heaviness of her steps on their floor. But they saw how carefully she worked, how she held their patience as if they were made of something precious, and slowly the fear turned to trust. By the end of the second week, a Velimi healer named Lu began working beside her without flinching. Hana requested a long-term assignment. She sent the request to Taeho directly, with a note that simply said, "They need us. I would like to stay." Taeho approved it within the hour. Captain Yuna took on a different project. She oversaw the construction of an orbital defense platform above the Velimi homeworld. It was not a large station by Terran standards, a basic weapons platform with shield generators, sensor arrays, and a small fighter bay. But for the Velimi, who had never built a weapon in their entire history, it was something extraordinary. It floated above their world like a guardian, watching the sky they had always trusted and that had finally betrayed them. Yuna calibrated the targeting systems herself. She tested every gun, every sensor, every shield frequency. When she was satisfied, she invited Elder Nolu aboard for a tour. The old Velimi walked through the station slowly, his glow a steady, thoughtful blue-green. He touched the walls, looked out the viewports at his world below, and said nothing for a long time. "Captain," he said finally, "we do not know how to use this." Yuna nodded. "We will teach you. It will take time, but you will learn. We have never made a weapon. I know, and I hope you never need to use this one. But if you do, it will be here. And if you ever need more than this, call us. We will come again." Nolu looked at her. His glow warmed. "Your people are strange, Captain." Yuna almost smiled. "We have been told." Ensign Kyung had become something unexpected during those 3 weeks. He had become famous, at least among the Velimi. The children called him a name in their language that Hana translated roughly as, "the one who fell from the sky." It was said with warmth and wonder, and it followed him wherever he went. His injuries from the crash had healed quickly, as injuries did for humans. The Velimi found this terrifying and fascinating in equal measure. They had watched the medics pull shrapnel from his back and stitch a wound on his forehead, and he had sat through it, talking and even laughing, which was completely incomprehensible to a species that could die from a hard fall. He became a kind of walking myth among the younger Velimi, proof that the universe contained beings who could break and then simply put themselves back together. He visited the shelters every day. He brought small things, a Terran compass with a needle that always pointed north, a paper crane he had folded from a sheet of notebook paper, a smooth stone from a riverbed on Earth that he had carried with him since he was a boy. The Velimi children gathered around him each time, their glows flickering with curiosity and delight. They touched his gifts carefully, turned them over in their delicate hands, and asked him questions through the translation device that he answered with the patience of someone who had discovered something more important than combat. One child in particular, a small girl named Rian, had attached herself to him completely. She followed him everywhere, sat in his lap when he rested, and held onto his finger with her tiny hand while they walked. Her glow was always gold when he was near. Yuna noticed the change in him. He was not the nervous, frightened boy who had launched from Mars 3 weeks ago. Something had settled in him, something calm and clear. She recommended him for promotion in her official report, and noted beside his name, "This one understands why we fight." On the 18th day, Sergeant Day held a memorial. 4 Terran Marines had died during the ground assault. Their names were Subin, Take, Miran, and Jun. Subin had been the one who took the plasma bolt to the shoulder and kept fighting. She had died 20 minutes later from internal injuries she refused to report because she was covering the retreat of a group of Velimi civilians. Take had been killed clearing a building rigged with explosives. Miran and Jun had died together, holding a bridge against a Drash counterattack, so a Marine evacuation shuttle could land behind them. Day stood on a flat piece of ground outside the capital, under the alien sky, with the fleet visible above like a field of dark stars. Behind him, 4 rifles had been driven into the earth, each with a helmet resting on top. The Marines stood in formation. They were still. Their faces showed nothing, because that was how they honored their dead, not with tears, but with the discipline that their fallen had earned. Day read the names aloud. He simply said each name, clearly and slowly, and let the silence hold them. The Velimi had asked to attend. Hundreds of them gathered at the edges of the memorial, quiet, watching. They did not understand military customs. They did not know what the rifles and helmets meant. But they understood grief, and they understood sacrifice, and they understood that these 4 humans had died so that Velimi could live. When Day finished reading the names, something happened that no human expected. The Velimi began to glow. All of them, together. A slow, pulsing wave of deep, warm light that started at the edges of the crowd and swept inward until every Velimi present was part of it. The light moved in rhythm, like a heartbeat, like breathing, like music without sound. Gold and blue and white, rising and falling in patterns that were ancient and sacred. Hana, standing at Teho's side, felt tears running down her face. She whispered, "It is their highest honor, a hymn of light. They give it only to those who gave everything." Day watched the light. His face did not change, because Day's face never changed. But he closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, they were brighter than before. In the days that followed, the galaxy shifted. Bora's broadcast had done its work. Species across the known systems had seen what happened at the Velimi homeworld, and it had changed something in the way they thought about the Deathworlders of Earth. For centuries, humanity had been feared, a dangerous, violent species from a world of death, best avoided, best left alone. But now the galaxy had seen something different. They had seen the feared monsters run toward danger instead of away from it. They had seen Deathworlders cradle dying aliens in their arms. They had seen a fleet built for war, used for rescue. 7 species formally broke with the Galactic Council and requested defensive alliances with Earth. 12 more sent private messages to Terran Command, asking quietly, carefully, if the Terrans would extend their protection. The Drask Dominion, exposed and humiliated, faced internal rebellion as conquered species saw their moment. Gorek was sentenced to a Terran military prison. His empire began to crumble. On the last day, Admiral Teho stood on the bridge of the grim tide and looked down at the Velimi homeworld one final time. It was still scarred. The burns would take years to heal, and some things would never grow back. But the cities were glowing again, faintly, softly, new light in old wounds. Bora spoke in his ear. "Admiral, I have compiled a summary of communications received since the broadcast. 17 species have sent inquiries to Terran Command asking whether humanity would respond to future distress calls from non-allied worlds." Teho sat in his chair. He thought about that for a long time. 17 species, most of whom had spent their entire histories avoiding Earth, were now asking if the Deathworlders would protect them, not because humanity had asked for their loyalty, not because there was a treaty or a trade deal or a strategic advantage, simply because someone, somewhere, had called for help, and the humans had come. He opened a channel, not to the fleet, not to Terran Command, to everyone, every frequency, every band, every open channel and range. His voice would carry across relay stations and reach every corner of the known galaxy. To every species listening on this frequency, we are the Terran Deathworld Fleet. We come from a world of fire, storm, and war. We were not made to be gentle, but we chose to be. If you are in danger, if you are afraid, if no one else will answer, call us. We will come. That is our promise, and we do not break our promises. The bridge was silent. Take us home, he said. The fleet jumped to hyperspace. 300 warships, one by one, vanishing into the light, and leaving behind a world that was broken, but no longer alone. On the surface, Elder Nolu stood on the steps of the rebuilt Grand Shelter. The sky was empty now, the Terran ships gone. The evening air was cool and still. Around him, the city glowed softly, its people rebuilding, its light returning. A small hand tugged at his robe. He looked down. It was Reen, the child who had followed Ensign Kyung everywhere. She looked up at him with wide, bright eyes, her glow a warm, steady gold. "Elder," she said, "were the Death Worlders really monsters?" Nolu looked up at the sky where the fleet had been. He smiled, and his glow matched hers, warm and gold and full of something that the Velimi had 100 words for, but which, in the simple language of the Death Worlders, was just called hope. "No, little one," he said. "They were the monsters that monsters are afraid of. Above them, the stars were quiet, but they were listening. They were always listening. And somewhere out there, in the deep black between the worlds, the wolves of Earth were running, not hunting, but guarding, ready to answer, ready to come. And the galaxy, for the first time in a very long time, felt a little less dark."